They thought I wouldn't notice, just an old woman with bad knees and fading memory. But I counted every mile in my bones, and I knew this wasn't the road home. My name is Lean, and I am 76 years old. I raised 3 children in a 2-room apartment in Da Nang, Vietnam, outlived my husband, and watched the world grow colder through the lens of my living room window. When my youngest son, Bao, begged me to come live with him and his new wife in California, I said yes, not because I wanted to leave home, but because I didn't want him to feel guilty when I died alone. For the first few months in America, I tried my best to be invisible. I folded their laundry. I cleaned when they were at work. I sat in silence during dinner while my daughter-in-law, Rachel, scrolled through her phone between bites. Bao worked long hours, and when he came home, he looked at me with a tired smile, as if saying sorry without words. But Rachel never liked me. She never had to say it out loud. I could hear it in the way she sighed when I entered the room, the way she rearranged the dishwasher after I loaded it, the way she locked her bedroom door even though I never knocked. Then, one morning, she made me tea. She had never made me tea before. "You should go visit your cousin in Houston," she said sweetly, as if it were her idea and not mine. "Just for a week or two. Get a little change of scenery." I looked into her eyes and saw something rehearsed. I didn't want to leave, but she had already booked the flight. Bao didn't argue. He hugged me goodbye in the driveway like I was going to the dentist, not across the country. I carried my old leather bag, the same one I brought to the refugee camp in '78, and let Rachel drive me to the airport. She barely said a word on the way. When we got there, she handed me a boarding pass, gave me a weak smile, and said, "Call us when you land." But she never said where I would land. 3 hours into the flight, I knew something was wrong. The airline staff smiled politely when I asked in broken English, "Houston," but their smiles grew stiff. One of them leaned down, looked at my boarding pass, then smiled again, the kind of smile you give a child who doesn't know better. "This flight goes to Seattle, ma'am," she said. I stared at her, stunned. I didn't know anyone in Seattle. My hands began to shake. Not because I was afraid, because I was angry. The airport in Seattle was colder than I remembered airports being. I sat on a metal bench with my coat wrapped tight around me and stared at my phone, the screen full of words I couldn't read. I pressed Bao's number. Straight to voicemail. I waited. An hour passed. Then 2. Rachel didn't call. She wanted me lost. I found a quiet corner by a bakery and sat with my bag on my lap. My husband used to say, "Lean, no storm lasts forever." But that was before men like Bao stopped listening to their mothers. Before women like Rachel decided who stayed and who disappeared. I looked around. Everyone moved fast. Eyes on screens. Feet in motion. I wondered what I looked like to them, just another frail woman who didn't know where she was going. But I wasn't frail. I was a mother. I was a survivor. And I was not going to let this be the end of my story. I approached a woman behind the information desk. She looked young, with tired eyes and red braids under her headset. "Please," I said softly. "Help me. My daughter-in-law wrong flight." She blinked, confused. "Do you have an emergency contact?" I handed her a crumpled envelope with my cousin Lan's address in Houston. "I go here, not Seattle." She took a breath. "Ma'am, we can get you on a connecting flight, but it may take a day or 2. Do you have money? A card?" I shook my head. She looked at me again, this time like a human. "Not a problem. Wait here," she said. And for the first time all day, I felt seen. That night, I stayed in a quiet airport lounge for stranded passengers. The red-haired woman, her name was Mariah, brought me soup and a blanket. I told her about my son, about Rachel, about the tea that wasn't sweet and the goodbye that didn't feel real. She didn't say much, just listened. Sometimes, that's more than enough. The next morning, she handed me a plane ticket to Houston. "Courtesy of the Airport Assistance Program," she said, but I knew it came from her own pocket. "Thank you," I whispered, but I wasn't finished. In Houston, Lon greeted me with tears and a slap on the shoulder. "What kind of son sends his mother to the wrong city?" she cried. I didn't answer. I only said, "I need your help." For 3 days, we worked. I borrowed her laptop. I asked her to translate my words. I filmed a video. Just me, sitting at her dining table with my hands folded in my lap. I told the story. Every part. The bad tea. The wrong gate. The silence of my son. I posted it on a group for Vietnamese mothers in America. And then I waited. By nightfall, it had 20,000 views. By morning, it had 2 million. The phone rang. Rachel's name. I let it ring. Then Bao called. He left a voicemail. Mom, I didn't know. I thought you were going to Houston. I'm sorry. Rachel said everything was fine. The voice cracked. Too late. An elderly woman from the same group offered me a place to stay in Dallas. She said she had daughters too, the kind who forget how much their mothers gave. I accepted. I began teaching Vietnamese cooking classes in the community center. I walked with other old women in the park. I even joined a writing group. Every week, someone would recognize me. You're the mother from the video, they'd say. And I'd smile. Not because I was famous, but because I had reminded people that we are not disposable. When Bao finally came to see me, he brought flowers and shame. Rachel did not come. He sat across from me, silent, and said, I didn't protect you. I looked at my son, once small enough to fit on my lap, and said gently, No, you didn't. But now you can decide what kind of man you want to be. He nodded. Sometimes shame is the beginning of change. Sometimes it isn't. But that's not my burden anymore. I am Lean. I was put on the wrong flight by someone who wanted me gone. But I chose where I landed. And I taught her a lesson she'll never forget. A month passed. Then two. The video was still circling the internet, shared among aunties and Facebook groups, reposted on cooking forums, even translated into Spanish and Korean. But I didn't pay attention to any of that. I was too busy living. Every morning, I got up early and made jasmine tea for myself and for Mrs. Thursday, the woman I now lived with. She was 81, sharp as a needle, and loud enough to shake the walls. She used to run a faux restaurant in Garland before her knees gave out. Now she ran a home full of memories and stories, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I belonged somewhere. You still think about them? She asked me one morning, watching me from across the kitchen table. I didn't need to ask who she meant. Yes, I said. Good. Don't forget. But don't let them keep you frozen. I smiled. I'm not frozen. She pointed at my hands. Then stop squeezing that teacup like you're trying to crack it. I laughed, and for the first time in months, it didn't feel like something forced. One day after class, I had started teaching weekly Vietnamese cooking sessions at the local community center. A girl about 10 years old came up to me, holding a little notebook. Her mother trailed behind her. Are you the lady from the video? The girl asked. The one who taught the bad lady a lesson? I laughed. I suppose I am. She handed me the notebook. Inside was a drawing of me standing at an airport with a speech bubble that said, I don't belong to you. I belong to myself. I felt my throat tighten. Her mother stepped forward and said, I showed her your story. She was being bullied at school. She wanted to quit. Then she saw your face, and she said, if the grandma can stand up, so can I. So thank you. I hugged the little girl and signed her notebook. Then I went into the bathroom, locked the door, and cried into a paper towel. Not because I was sad, but because I had no idea how many people needed to hear my story. 3 months after the flight, I received a package. There was no return address. Inside was a small wooden box hand-carved. I opened it slowly. Inside, I found something unexpected. A pair of jade earrings. They were mine. The ones Bao had given me on my 60th birthday. I had thought I lost them in the move to California. Underneath them was a note, written in delicate script. You never forgot who you were. I hope someday I can learn to do the same. I'm sorry, Rachel. I sat down. I stared at the note for a long time. It would have been easier if she had said nothing, because now I had to forgive her. And forgiveness, real forgiveness, doesn't come from pity. It comes from power. Will you go back? Mrs. Thursday asked me that evening. No, I said. You could. On your terms. That's different. I shook my head. They know where to find me. I won't chase them. She nodded. That's strength, she said. No, I replied. That's peace. A few weeks later, I got a call from a local journalist. She was writing a piece on aging in America, especially among immigrant communities, and wanted to talk to me. I'm not special, I told her. But you are, she said. Because you said what thousands of others were afraid to say. We sat down in a quiet coffee shop. I wore the jade earrings. Not because I had forgiven Rachel, not yet, but because they were mine, and I would not let her memory own them. What's the biggest lesson you've learned? The journalist asked. I thought for a long time. That being invisible doesn't protect you, I said finally. Sometimes you have to let the world see you even if it's not ready. She smiled. That's going in the headline. I chuckled. Then at least spell my name right. The article went viral. Again. Soon I started getting invitations, interviews, podcasts, local talks at retirement homes. I said no to most of them. I didn't want fame. I wanted to feel useful. But I said yes to one. A small podcast hosted by a Vietnamese woman named Tien, who used to be a caregiver for elderly immigrants. She asked thoughtful questions, not flashy ones. "What would you say to a daughter-in-law like Rachel?" she asked me near the end. I looked into the mic. "I would say love is not obedience, and kindness is not weakness. Elders are not pets or projects. We are people. We remember more than you think. We forgive more than we should. But when we rise, when we finally speak, you better be ready to listen." When the podcast aired, the producers emailed me. 500,000 streams in 3 days. I turned off my phone and went for a walk. One afternoon, I was sitting in the park feeding birds when a young man with a baseball cap walked toward me. He looked nervous. It was Bao. He stood there, unsure if he should sit. I nodded at the bench beside me. He sat. "I came alone," he said. "I noticed," I said. He looked down. "She's not the same since everything happened." "Neither am I." He exhaled. "Mom, I was wrong. I let her speak for both of us. I let her do things I knew were wrong because I didn't want to fight. But I failed you. I didn't speak." He continued, "I've been going to therapy. I've been trying to understand how I lost my spine." I turned and looked at him, my son, the baby who once clung to my leg during typhoons. "I don't need you to be perfect, Bao," I said. "I need you to be present." Tears welled up in his eyes. "I want to be," he whispered. I reached for his hand, and for the first time in years, he didn't pull away. "Then stay a while," I said. We watched the birds in silence. Not everything needed to be spoken, but this mattered. Spring came to Dallas, soft and golden. In the park, the air smelled like fresh grass and warm dirt. Children chased kites, couples walked slowly, and I sat under the old oak tree with a cup of green tea in a paper cup. My knees still ached when it rained, but my soul had never been more alive. Bao visited me every week now. He would drive up from Austin, sometimes just for a few hours. We'd sit on the porch with a bowl of fruit between us and talk. Not always about the past, sometimes about nothing. And in that nothing, we found healing. He never once defended Rachel. He never once asked me to forget. That, more than anything, helped me forgive. One Saturday, Bao brought his daughter, Ellie. She was 6, with pigtails and enormous curiosity. She looked up at me like I was a treasure chest someone had just opened. "You're the grandma who got famous," she said. I laughed. "Only a little bit. Mom says I can't watch your video, but Daddy said I can meet you. He said you're the strongest lady in the world." That made my throat close. I leaned down and whispered, "Even strong ladies need hugs sometimes." She jumped into my arms. And just like that, a piece of my heart clicked back into place. That night, Bao stayed longer than usual. Ellie had fallen asleep on the couch, curled next to Mrs. Thursday's cat. I was washing dishes when he came beside me, drying the plates without asking. "I filed for separation," he said, like it hurt to even say the words. I stopped scrubbing. She didn't want counseling, didn't want to talk, said she didn't like who I was becoming. I raised an eyebrow. "And who are you becoming?" He smiled faintly. "Your son again." I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. I just passed him another plate. Word began to spread in Dallas that I was the woman with the voice. I didn't understand why they said that. I thought my voice had cracked, faded, been lost in years of silence. But apparently, it had found its power. One day, I got a letter from a Vietnamese women's group at a senior center. They were organizing a citywide event on intergenerational healing and wanted me to be the closing speaker. "I've never spoken on a stage," I told the organizer. "Your story already has," she said. "Now we want your voice to join it." So I said yes. Not because I wanted the spotlight, but because I wanted the silence to stop. The night before the event, I stood in front of my small mirror and practiced. "I am not what you thought I was," I whispered. "I am not a burden. I am not fragile. I am not disposable." The words trembled at first, but then they stood tall. I wore my nicest Ao dye, the one I had brought from Vietnam but never had the courage to put on in California. Deep blue with silver lotus patterns. It still fit. My shoulders had grown straighter somehow. At the event, hundreds came. Grandmothers, daughters, husbands, social workers, even strangers who only knew me as the flight grandma. I stepped onto the stage, and I spoke. Not loud, not fancy, just truth. My daughter-in-law put me on the wrong flight, but she put herself on the wrong path, and I chose a different ending. I told them about the tea, about the bench in Seattle, about the soup from Mariah, about the letter from Rachel, and I ended with this. Age doesn't shrink us. Silence does. Don't wait for someone to save you. Stand up, speak, and choose your own landing. They stood. Not one clapped at first. They just stood. Then the applause came like thunder. I closed my eyes and let it wash over me. Not because I needed praise, but because I needed to remember that I still mattered. After that, my life changed again. But not in the way people think. I didn't move into a bigger house. I didn't start a nonprofit. I didn't travel the world. I just lived. Every Thursday, I hosted tea nights with 3 other elderly women. We laughed louder than we probably should have. We argued about spices like philosophers. We played old music and danced in slow circles. Every Saturday, I had lunch with Bao and Ellie. Sometimes she brought me flowers. Sometimes just drawings. But every time, she kissed my cheek and said, "I love you, Grandma." Those were the 3 words I waited a lifetime to hear again. And they didn't come from a daughter-in-law. They came from someone new. Someone pure. Someone I would never let go. Rachel never contacted me again. But I heard from her once more through a letter Ellie found buried in the pages of a book she brought from California. The envelope had no stamp. Just my name. Inside was a short message. Lean. I never understood how lonely a woman can become until I became one. I hope you are loved now, the way you always deserve to be. I wasn't strong enough to be your daughter, but I hope your granddaughter will be. I sat on the porch with the letter in my lap for a long time. Then I folded it carefully and placed it inside the same box that once held my jade earrings. I didn't hate her anymore. I didn't trust her either. But I finally saw her clearly. And I pitied her. Because some people never board the right flight, not because others sabotage them, but because they keep choosing the wrong gate. I planted a garden behind the house. Chili, mint, lemongrass, basil. The smells reminded me of Da Nang, of rainy seasons, of my mother's laughter. Sometimes the younger women from the community center would come by and help. Sometimes we just sat on the ground and talked about our mothers. I told them not all stories are tidy. Not all families heal. But if you live long enough, you realize something important. You don't need the whole family to come back. You just need one person to stay. One summer afternoon, Ellie asked me a question I wasn't ready for. "Grandma, what's going to happen when you're gone?" I froze. She was coloring next to me on the porch, eyes fixed on the paper. "Why do you ask that?" I said gently. "Because everyone talks about people leaving, but no one says where they go." I looked at her, this little girl with her big heart and wide eyes. "I'll go to where all the good stories go," I said finally. "Someplace quiet. But if you listen carefully, you'll still hear me in your heart." She smiled. "Then I'll write you letters," she said, "so you won't get lonely." My eyes burned. I reached over and pulled her into my arms. "I'll never be lonely," I whispered. "Not anymore." That night, after Ellie fell asleep in the spare room, I sat by my bedroom window, listening to the hum of crickets and the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. I thought about my husband, Nia. If he were still alive, I wondered what he'd think of all this. He always said I had a fire in me. I used to laugh it off. But maybe he was right. I wasn't just fire, I was smoke and ash and breath and wind. I had survived wars, oceans, betrayals, and the slow erosion of dignity. And I was still here, still standing, still stubborn. I whispered into the darkness, "I made it, Nia. I'm okay." And I swear, for a second, the wind shifted like someone answering. A few days later, I was invited to visit a local high school. One of the teachers had played the podcast episode I'd spoken on for her class of seniors, and they had written essays about their own grandparents after hearing my story. When I entered the classroom, 25 teenagers stood up quietly, respectfully, and offered me their seats. I sat at the front, unsure what to say. Then one girl raised her hand. "Did it hurt?" she asked. "What?" I said. "When they forgot who you were." I took a deep breath. Yes, it hurt in the deepest places. But it also reminded me that love must be loud. Quiet love disappears. Loud love survives. Another boy asked, "Do you think they regret it now?" I thought of Rachel. Then I shook my head. "Regret isn't always loud either," I said. "Some people regret you in silence for the rest of their lives. But by the time they speak, you've already walked away." Afterward, the teacher gave me a folder filled with handwritten letters from the students. One said, I never called my grandma until I heard your story. I thought she was just old. But now I know she's a whole person. I'm sorry it took your pain for me to see mine. I held that letter to my chest and closed my eyes. Months passed. Seasons changed again. One day, I received an invitation from a Vietnamese language school. They were launching a program to connect older immigrants with younger generations, to preserve oral history through storytelling and cooking. They wanted me to be their first living library. I laughed when I heard the term. Living library? I asked the young coordinator, Liam. You tell stories. They listen. Then they write them down. Like books except you're still breathing. I accepted. Every Sunday, I sat in a small circle with a group of kids aged 9 to 16. I told them stories about the war, about my wedding, about escaping by boat, about the time I made dinner for 20 people with one pan and a broken stove. They listened. They laughed. They cried. They called me Baleen. Some weeks, they brought their parents. And slowly, I became something I never expected to be again. Essential. In December, Bao asked me if I wanted to spend Christmas with him and Ellie. She wants to make gingerbread, he said. She wants you to show her how to make bon tête, too. I hesitated. But Rachel, I began. She moved out, he said. A month ago. Finalized everything quietly. He looked up at me, his eyes soft but steady. She was a lesson I had to learn the hard way. But she's not our story anymore. I nodded slowly. I'll come, I said. And when I did, I brought sticky rice and banana leaves and a new red owl dye for Ellie. She screamed when she saw me and ran into my arms, nearly knocking over the Christmas tree. That night, as we sat around the table making bon tête, Bao looked up and said softly, I'm proud of you, Mom. I looked at the table, at the warm rolls of rice, at the child humming to herself beside me, and replied, I'm proud of me too. One evening in January, I received a phone call from Mariah, the airport worker who had helped me in Seattle almost a year ago. I've been following your journey, she said, laughing. You've gone viral 5 times since I last saw you. I still owe you soup, I joked. You don't owe me anything, she said. But I did want to ask if you'd ever come back to Seattle. We're building a new traveler assistance program at the airport, and we want you to be the keynote speaker at the launch. I paused. It felt like a full circle to return to the very terminal where my abandonment had begun. Yes, I said after a moment. I'd love to. At the Seattle airport, nearly 1 year to the day since Rachel dropped me off at the wrong gate, I stood beneath the blinking arrivals board. This time, I wore a name tag and a mic. This time, Mariah hugged me tightly. You look even stronger in person, she said. I smiled. Maybe I am. At the podium, I looked out at the crowd, staff, volunteers, immigrant families, strangers. And I began. 1 year ago, I sat here in fear. Today, I stand here in purpose. I told them about kindness, about the soup, about how one small act saved my life. I ended with this. When you see an old woman alone at the gate, don't just assume she's lost. Maybe she's finally found. The audience rose to their feet. Some cried. Some clapped. Some simply nodded, the kind of nod you give when your heart has been reminded of its own worth. Spring again. I stood in my little backyard garden, barefoot in the soft grass, staring up at the sky where the clouds drifted like ships. Another year had passed. Another circle around the sun. But this time, I wasn't surviving. I was thriving. Ellie had grown taller. Her handwriting no longer curved like waves, but marched strong like soldiers. She was proud of her Vietnamese, now practiced it with me every Tuesday, wrote poems about jasmine tea and bon chum. Bao had changed too. He spoke slower, listened more. He had joined a local men's group focused on emotional healing. Sometimes, he brought me the things he wrote. They made me cry in the quietest way. And Rachel? She was gone. Not just from Bao's life, but from mine completely. And I had let go of the weight she once placed on me. Because forgiveness, I realized, is not something you offer for their sake. You offer it so the stone in your chest finally floats. One morning in April, I received a letter. It came from a woman named Cynthia in New Jersey. Her mother had passed away a few weeks ago, an old Vietnamese woman named Min who had followed my story online. Cynthia wrote, she used to listen to your interviews and say, that woman speaks what I couldn't. Before she died, she asked me to print your face and tape it next to her bed. She said, tell Lean I'm proud of her. Tell her she spoke for women like me. I held that letter for hours. And that night, I lit incense and whispered to the sky, "Min, I heard you. Thank you." The smoke curled upward like a prayer. One Sunday, during a community meal at the center, a young woman approached me. She looked barely 20, with thick glasses and nervous fingers. "My mom left when I was 6, she said. "My grandma raised me, but I never appreciated her. She died last year." I waited. "She used to sit in that chair you're in now," she continued, tears in her eyes. "She always said, the world doesn't see us, so we must see each other." I didn't understand it then, but now, she couldn't finish. So I stood, took her hands in mine, and said, "Then see her now in every rice grain, in every morning breeze. She never left you." The girl sobbed. "Sometimes, we don't need answers. Just someone to name the silence with us." A local university contacted me next. They wanted to start an oral history archive, one focused solely on elder immigrants. They asked if I would be the first to record. They didn't want numbers. They didn't want names of battles. They wanted feeling. So I gave them everything. I told them about the child I lost to pneumonia in '66. About the night I sewed my husband's uniform back together while listening to bombs drop in the distance. About the first time I saw snow and cried because it reminded me of ash. They didn't interrupt. They just listened. And when I finished, the young student running the recorder whispered, "Your voice, it's like reading scripture." I chuckled. Then I hope the world remembers it like one. On the anniversary of my flight 1 year exactly since the day Rachel sent me away, I held a tea circle at the community center. 10 women came. Then 20. Then almost 40. Some wore traditional dress. Others came in jeans. Some had daughters with them. Some had none. But we sat in a circle, warm mugs in hand, and shared truths. One woman said, "My son only calls when he needs money." Another said, "My daughter-in-law rolls her eyes when I speak Vietnamese to the baby." Another wept silently, no words needed. When it was my turn, I simply said, "I was erased once. Now I write myself back in, every day." We clinked our mugs together gently, like bells for the forgotten. Months passed like silk. Bao invited me to stay with them for a few weeks during the summer. They had moved into a smaller house, just the two of them, now quiet, modest, and warm. Ellie had made a "Welcome, Grandma" banner that hung crookedly in the hallway. I kissed her forehead and told her it was perfect. Every morning, we cooked together, her small hands learning to wrap bon quan, mine steady and patient. She asked about Vietnam, about how I met her grandfather, about how I had survived so much. "Were you ever scared?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "Often." "What did you do?" "I stayed anyway." She looked up and whispered, "I want to be like that." And in that moment, I felt it, the quiet, unshakable knowledge that my legacy had already begun. One afternoon, Bao and I sat under the oak tree behind his house. The sun filtered through the branches, painting us in gold. He turned to me and said, "I think I want to start writing too." "About what?" He smiled. "About you. About how a son forgot his mother and remembered her just in time." I didn't speak. I just reached over and held his hand. That was enough. Years later, after I passed, they would say many things. They would say I was the woman from the video, the one who got on the wrong plane and changed her whole life. They would say I was a mother who forgave, a grandmother who taught, a fighter who never raised her voice but never lowered her dignity either. But I hope, most of all, they say this: that I was a woman who refused to disappear, that I was not discarded, that I turned betrayal into beauty, and silence into song.